Welcome to Warping Fist.
To call the DC Cinematic Universe a jumbled mess is an understatement. In its 10 years of existence, we've received a total of 12 films with flip-flopping critical reception, dwindling box office returns, and no cohesive continuity. While it's true that they have some critical darlings in the past couple of years, they've unfortunately had just as much critical duds. Despite also being a cinematic universe, they don't seem to have any kind of overarching narrative in its 10 years of existence. Compare this to Marvel's Infinity Saga, which over the course of 20 plus films created a captivating storyline that has captured the hearts of audiences all over the world, becoming the most successful franchise to ever exist. While it's disappointing that DC never managed to create the same kind of magic, we have to realize that there was many circumstances that caused this universe to have such an uncertain future. The DCEU originally did have a cohesive narrative, one that was meant to be told through a connected series of films with Zack Snyder and other filmmakers. Snyder played an active role in the early days of the DCEU and worked to create a larger narrative about Batman and Superman and the legacy they both left behind. Due to several circumstances, Snyder's plan for this expansive storyline was put on hold. With the DCEU no longer having a clear and set-in-stone direction, Warner Brothers would instead opt to embrace a disconnected series of films that loosely reference a wider universe, something that would create many problems down the line. Let's take a look at the history of the DC Cinematic Universe and the legacy it will leave behind. For years, DC helped push the medium of comic books forward through their amazing stories. They were a company that strived for quality and pushed for comic books to be taken seriously by general audiences. The Fleischer cartoons were very well put together compared to a lot of cartoons at the time. Superman the movie pioneered new filmmaking techniques and made people believe that a man could fly. The Burton Batman films sparked the imagination through its fantastical world and art design, and the Nolan trilogy showed many that comic book films could be taken just as seriously as the best auteur films. Of course, not everything DC made was a hit. When they made something bad, it was truly awful. When they did put together something amazing, it was truly a work of art to behold. Now it's clear that DC pushed the medium of comic book films to new heights. However, there was one category that they were yet to sink their teeth into, and not by a lack of trying, as they weren't entirely sure how to approach it. The idea of a cinematic universe has existed for quite a long time, with the most popular example being the Universal Monsterverse. The concept of a cinematic universe at the time was a novelty. Sure, it was nice to see your favorite characters appearing in other works, but they were nothing but fun encounters that didn't really lead to anything special. The blueprint for a cinematic universe was something that was free for anybody to use. However, it remained untapped. Nobody really tried to take this concept and do unique and new things with it. That was until Marvel Studios took a crack at it and through trial and error created a juggernaut of a franchise that still remains the biggest in the world even today. What Marvel did was take this long existing concept and truly perfected it by creating an entire storyline that spanned multiple years and multiple films, something that other cinematic universes never thought of doing at the time. Marvel may have jump-started a universe all the way back in 2008, but it's important to understand that they weren't the only company that experimented with this cinematic universe format. In fact, DC attempted to start a cinematic universe long before the DCEU ever existed. Justice League Mortal was one such attempt. Developed around the mid to late 2000s, Justice League Mortal was meant to kickstart a brand new DC universe on film. They had an excellent director on board in George Miller, and casting was well underway with a concrete filming date. If the movie was successful, Warner Brothers would have spun off the individual characters into their own solo movies. Although it's important to know that it's unknown if there was a wider plan with the universe and if these spin-offs would have led to another event film. What we do know, however, is that Justice League Mortal would eventually be cancelled due to a ballooning budget and the writer's strike of America. WB may have tried to create yet another cinematic universe back in 2011. Although not confirmed, Green Lantern could have potentially been the beginning for another cinematic universe for DC, with even a potential Flash film being set within this continuity. But the critical and financial failure of Green Lantern halted any such plan. Despite these two failures, DC has in fact created a successful cinematic universe, although on the small screen. Say what you want about those shows, but there's no denying that they did a great job in weaving all these shows together into one cohesive universe, with characters from one show appearing in another and crossovers that have all these heroes unite to face a bigger threat. There was a good sense of continuity as well, and an overarching narrative that was pretty intriguing despite the quality of these shows. When you think about it, WB already had the perfect blueprint for a cinematic universe right in their backyard, that being the DCAU. The universe had begun with Batman the Animated Series and would soon spin off into other shows like Superman, Static Shock, Batman Beyond, and eventually Justice League. There was a clear sense of continuity, as characters would constantly mention events from past shows and would even cross over into other series. There was a type of magical feeling seeing these characters interact, and it also helps that these individual series were very well put together as well. This was achieved simply because the creatives behind the DCAU were passionate about these characters and their stories. Way before the MCU's inception, the DCAU showed viewers the magic of what a cinematic universe can achieve when it's done right and crafted by a team of passionate creators. It makes you wonder why Warner didn't just choose these creatives to help build their cinematic universe. Before the release of Man of Steel, it would be reported that the film would kickstart a brand new DC universe, which shared the same grounded tone as this new Superman film. Warner had seen the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and would allow Zack Snyder and a team of talented filmmakers to formulate this brand new connected universe. However, unlike the MCU, this universe would handle their first couple of films much differently from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This fact was made clear when Warner Brothers announced their slate of DC films. Instead of building up individual films for each member of the Justice League, most of the members would be introduced in Batman v Superman and then make a full-on appearance in Justice League. Many would find this decision strange. Some fans felt that DC was trying to play catch-up with Marvel by fast-tracking and rushing towards a team-up film. However, by analyzing the overall plan of the DC universe, you can see why Zack Snyder took such a different approach to this cinematic universe. You see, unlike the Marvel universe, the DCEU had a conclusive ending. So originally, when Snyder first envisioned this universe, he had a plan for a 5-movie arc, beginning with Man of Steel and ending with Justice League Part 2. This universe plan would also be supplemented through other DC films, such as Suicide Squad, which directly tied into Justice League, Wonder Woman, which explained the origins of the character, a Batman film that dived deeper into the psyche of the character, a Flash movie, and a series of other DC films that may have released. Each film in the DC Extended Universe would have intrinsically tied to this 5-film arc. And with Zack Snyder's deep involvement in these films, it was clear that this DC Extended Universe had a clear and concise vision if handled properly. Now it's unknown if there would have been more films set after the events of Justice League Part 2, due to the fact that JL Part 2 would have served as the ultimate conclusion to this universe, ending in a 20-year time jump. Because of this, the DCEU would have went in two possible directions. One is that any new film would have been set before, after, or in between the events of JL Part 2. The second option would be that DC just reboots again and starts fresh with a new universe. Now it's more likely that DC would have went with the first option, as there's still 20 years worth of stories they could tell. The only difference is that Batman would no longer be a major part of the universe. Luckily, since Batman was already a veteran, they could still give him prequel films set before the events of BVS, or even give him Elseworld stories, akin to Matt Reeves' Batman. Now this sounds like a very interesting approach to a cinematic universe, and would have truly been a sight to behold. However, as we all know, none of this ever happened in the end. So what exactly happened, and why did we end up having such a disjointed universe? Well, after the disappointing release of Batman v Superman, Warner would become scared about the future of the DC franchise. Due to the horrible theatrical cut of the film, BVS was criticized for having a disjointed story that seemed to care more about setup than telling a comparing narrative. It also didn't help that Suicide Squad was also receiving highly negative reception. Sure, these films were making a lot of money, but ultimately, the negative critical reception also meant that the DC brand in general would be negatively viewed by the general audience, which is a very big deal if you want your franchise to be successful in the long run. Seeing how audiences and critics now saw DC in a negative light, Warner sought ways to change the public opinion on their films. Warner would begin attempting to make their films a lot more lighthearted because they believed that the tone of these films were why audiences were so apprehensive. You can see these changes when it comes to films like Suicide Squad and how the Flash movie was cancelled because it had too much edge to it. At the time, the Justice League film was currently being filmed by Zack Snyder, so there wasn't much WB could do to convince him to embrace a more comedic and lighter tone. However, after Zack Snyder was hit with a major tragedy involving the death of his daughter, he would drop out of the film to mourn and be with his family. Warner Brothers, however, would see this as a perfect opportunity to boot Snyder off the project and begin revamping the film to fit in with a new vision. Warner Brothers would hire Joss Whedon as the new director, and the film would now undergo drastic reshoots. It's estimated that more than 50% of Justice League was reshot with new footage, and the pre-existing footage was drastically changed. The changes to the film compared to Snyder's original vision are clear as day. Justice League was of course a Frankenstein of a movie with awful visuals, terrible plot, borderline creepy scenes, and painfully unfunny humor. Fans and critics alike clearly did not enjoy this new Justice League film, and the film became a massive critical and financial failure. After the massive failure of Justice League, Warner would begin massively restructuring their DC plan. Many creatives would come and go, many with drastically different ideas on the direction the DC universe should go. DC no longer had a definitive plan, and we can thank the incompetence of many of the executives at the studio. According to the president of DC Entertainment at the time, Diane Nelson, interconnectivity of the universe was no longer a major factor. Instead, they wanted to focus on individual stories that didn't have to worry about a wider universe. This idea would once again be repeated by Warner Brothers president Kevin Tsujihara, who after the success of Aquaman would also state that DC were more focused on individual character stories that weren't building up towards a larger narrative. If you read the subtext within these two quotes, these executives are basically saying that They had no idea what to do with the DC cinematic universe anymore. After Snyder was essentially kicked off the universe, his 5-film arc was essentially null and void. And now, there was no storyline in place they could build towards after the failure of Justice League. Creating individual films was just a way for DC to buy time until they could actually formulate a wider plan they could finally build towards. Although DC at the moment was focusing on individual films that weren't connected, that led to another major problem, having to do with the lack of communication and continuity errors. Because DC Films had no Kevin Feige figure and Zack Snyder was now gone, that resulted in there being no kind of communication between the various creatives and resulted in a host of continuity errors and retcons for the DCEU. First of all, the DCEU has 2 different versions of Atlanteans who are nowhere near the same. Wonder Woman 1984 creates even more strange continuity errors, the worst being how the world is shocked by Superman, despite the fact that in the 80s, everyone got their wishes granted. In Shazam, it's mentioned that Black Adam freed the 7 deadly sins and caused chaos throughout the world. Yet in the Black Adam film, this event is never mentioned nor referenced. General Swanwick is supposedly Martian Manhunter, yet he didn't help during the events of Man of Steel, BVS, and Justice League for seemingly no reason. In Peacemaker, there's an entire argument about how Batman doesn't kill, which is blatantly false because he does kill and he's killed a lot of people. The DCEU never had a key creative figure, making sure that all the puzzle pieces fit together, making these films less reliant on connectivity, only serve to fracture the universe and ruin any sense of connectivity it may have had. While there are benefits to having these films be disconnected, audiences just did not care for a cinematic universe that ultimately led to nothing. However, with the continuous development of Ezra Miller's Flash movie, we began to see hints that DC was beginning to foreshadow and set up an interesting new direction for their universe. The first and most important is the presence of Michael Keaton's Batman in the universe. After Ben Affleck dropped out of the role, DC was now in desperate need of a new Caped Crusader for their universe, and instead of recasting, they opted to replace Ben Affleck with Michael Keaton's Batman, who was set up in the Flash movie. From what we can understand, his role was supposed to be like Nick Fury. He'd be a mentor figure for many young heroes such as Leslie Grace's Batgirl and perhaps even Blue Beetle. There also seems to have been plans for him to have a Batman Beyond style film where he'd once again take on the guy in the chair type role. There are rumors that DC was trying to build towards a massive event film in the form of Crisis on Infinite Earths, with Ben Affleck, Henry Cavill's Superman, and many other DC heroes throughout the multiverse coming together to face a major threat. Now, whether or not people would have been excited for a Crisis movie is unknown, as DC hasn't done much to garner excitement for their universe in general. However, what we do know is that there was a clear lack of communication between the creatives at DC. For one thing, The Rock brought back Henry Cavill's Superman into Black Adam. Warner was also reportedly working on a brand new Superman film, with Henry Cavill set to return. The script was reportedly being written by Steven DeKnight and would have featured Brainiac as the main villain. However, there was one major problem. Henry never signed any contracts to return, meaning that it was not definite that he would stay as Superman. We know this to be true because a couple of months later, after Henry announced his return, he would be let go from the role by James Gunn, who at this point became the president of DC Films. James Gunn and Peter Safran were chosen as the presidents of the newly formed DC Studios, a new independent studio that attempts to recreate the Marvel Cinematic Universe's formula, instead of decisions within DC Films moving towards many chains of command. all decisions regarding DC and their many future films and shows will be directly decided by James and Peter Safran. Ever since Gunn and Safran became the presidents of DC, they immediately began implementing major changes. For one thing, the original plan for a Crisis movie was scrapped. Wonder Woman 3 cancelled. Henry Cavill's return as Superman, better luck next time. Plans for a Batman Beyond film with Michael Keaton's Batman, well, that's not happening anymore. Gunn and Safran are really sparing no expense when it comes to overhauling the universe as we know it. However, these radical changes don't spawn from disrespect to the brand. In fact, James and Safran have been shown to have respectable knowledge and love for DC's source material, and both have been involved in some of the more acclaimed comic book films and projects in recent years. Now James Gunn has his own plans for the DC universe, one that is attempting to fix the broken foundations left behind by the old regimes. He wants to show people why DC is so beloved across the world, and that starts by creating quality films, TV shows, and other forms of media. The first of these new ventures will be a brand new Superman film that returns to his younger days and potentially takes inspiration from many seminal Superman stories of the past. James Gunn has also stated that when it comes to a cinematic universe, it's important to make really good standalone films before trying to interconnect them together. We'll have to wait and see how this film will turn out, but if it's good, it sets a good example for what we can expect from the rest of the universe.